You are about to hear a story that will blow your mind and leave you breathless. Something that seemed ordinary, but soon turned into a nightmare that was difficult to understand, as if reality was distorting before your eyes. You'll wonder, did this really happen? Get ready to venture into a mystery that defies logic and will captivate you from beginning to end. If you think you're safe, think again. Because what you hear next may be closer to your reality than you realize. Tension is in the air, and what comes next is simply disturbing. But first, tell me where you're watching me from. Story number 1, The Smile Van. It all started on an ordinary Tuesday in September. I was coming home from school when I first noticed the white van parked on the corner of my street. What caught my attention was not the vehicle itself, but the huge smiling emoji stuck to the rear window, a simple yellow smile, the kind that seems innocent at first glance. Max, my golden retriever, who always greeted me happily at the gate, started acting strangely that week. Every time the van appeared, he would growl and refuse to go for a walk, something completely out of his usual behavior. On Friday, my parents left for a wedding in the countryside, leaving me alone for the first time since I turned 16. "It's just a weekend," they said. "You are already responsible enough." The rain didn't stop falling, creating a constant drumming on the roof that, instead of being soothing, seemed to amplify every little noise in the house. The fogged-up windows turned the streetlights into fuzzy blurs, and the darkness seemed thicker than usual. That's when I realized the van was parked directly in front of my house. The emoji, illuminated by streetlights, appeared to have changed. The smile now looked more like a macabre grimace, with the edges curled unnaturally. Max began barking frantically at the living room window. As I approached to look, I saw a figure wearing a bright yellow coat, standing in the rain, looking directly at my house. In his hand, he held something that glittered metallically. I turned off all the lights and locked myself in the room with Max. My cell phone showed no signal. The storm must have affected the network. Panic began to set in when I heard footsteps on the gravel in the garden. It was then that Max ran under the bed and began frantically digging the floor. To my amazement, one of the floorboards came loose, revealing a secret compartment. Inside were dozens of yellowed newspaper clippings, all reporting disappearances of teenagers over the past 30 years. In each report, there was one detail in common: witnesses mentioned a white van with a painted smile. The most disturbing? The house where I lived appeared in several of the reports as the last place where the victims were seen. In the last photo, dated 1992, I recognized the face of the man in the yellow coat. He hadn't aged a day. Today, 3 years later, I live in another city. But sometimes, when it's raining and the street lights create shadows on the walls, I swear I see that macabre smile reflected in the window. Max has never been the same. He still barks at white vans, as if he knows something I can't fully understand. And the strangest thing? The house where we lived was demolished last year. In the rubble, they found more secret compartments in the walls, all empty except for small smiling emojis drawn on the surfaces inside. Story number 2, A Last Selfie. I never imagined that a simple photo could change my life forever. It happened 3 months ago when I decided to take a selfie for my Instagram in the new room of the house we had just moved into. Bella, my Siamese cat, was especially excited that afternoon. She kept jumping on my bed, meowing strangely at the wall behind my headboard, a behavior I immediately attributed to adapting to the new environment. My parents had gone to sort out the last of the moving issues, and I was alone finishing organizing my room. The sun was starting to set, creating that perfect golden light for photos. I positioned myself against the light wall, adjusted the angle, and took several selfies. It was when I was reviewing the photos that I noticed something strange. In one of them, there was a dark spot behind me, like a human-shaped shadow. In the next photo, the shadow seemed closer. And in the last one, there was a face. It wasn't a normal face. It was as if he was made of distorted pixels, with completely white eyes and a smile that stretched beyond the possible limits of a human face. The scariest thing was a QR code that pulsed in the center of his forehead. Bella started growling at my cell phone, something she had never done before. The temperature in the room dropped drastically, and my breath formed small clouds in the air. The cell phone started vibrating non-stop, opening and closing applications by itself. Then, all the photos in my gallery started to be replaced with that same distorted face. Strange messages appeared on the screen, geographic coordinates, sequences of numbers and, repeatedly, the phrase, "You're the next 404. When I tried to call my parents, I discovered that all my calls were redirected to a recording, the sound of static interspersed with digitized laughter and that characteristic noise of old modems. On the wall where I took the selfie, a binary code began to appear, as if it were being typed by invisible fingers. Bella hid under the bed, her eyes fixed on the wall, her pupils dilated with terror. Weeks later, I discovered that our house had been built on the ruins of an old artificial intelligence research center from the 90s. The project was abandoned after an incident that resulted in the mysterious deaths of 5 programmers. Their bodies were never found, but on their computers, a single photo was found, a distorted face with a QR code on the forehead. Today, I can no longer take selfies. My reflection in cell phone screens sometimes looks different. As if something was trying to replace my image with that digital face. Bella refuses to come into my room, and sometimes late at night I can hear the sound of an old modem coming from the walls. The most disturbing? When I finally managed to scan the QR code of the original photo, it led to a page with just one message, subject number 6 upload starting 3, 2, 1. Story number 3, The Midnight Piano. I grew up in an old house, the kind with enough history to fill a book. But nothing prepared me for what happened that winter night when I turned 17. My family had a Steinway grand piano in the living room, an heirloom that belonged to my great-grandmother. Thor, our Persian cat, always slept beneath him, as if he were his personal guardian. On that particular night, my parents were stranded in another city due to an unexpected blizzard. The house creaked with the intense cold, and the snow falling outside turned the windows into opaque white screens. It was exactly at midnight that I heard the first note. A.C. major, crystal clear and perfect, reverberating through the empty house. Thor, who was sleeping in my room, suddenly stood up, his fur standing on end. I walked down the stairs silently, holding my cell phone as a flashlight. The piano was exactly as it always was, but there was something different in the air, a sweet, metallic smell, like old perfume mixed with rust. Then I saw the keys move on their own, playing a melody I had never heard before. It was hypnotic, but there was something off about it. The notes seemed to form words in a language I could almost understand. On the polished surface of the piano, reflected in the moonlight that streamed through the windows, I saw a figure sitting on the bench. It was a woman wearing an emerald green Victorian dress, with a gold salamander brooch around her neck. But where his face should have been, there was only a musical score, the notes dancing as if they were alive. Thor came down the stairs and, to my surprise, jumped onto the piano bench next to the figure. The music changed, becoming more intense, and the sheet music on the woman's face began to run like fresh paint. It was then that I noticed the symbols appearing on the walls, musical pentagrams that glowed with their own greenish light, forming a circular pattern around the piano. The salamander brooch around the woman's neck began to move, as if it were alive. In a moment of panic, I took a photo with my cell phone. In the image, where the woman should have been, there was only a green spot in the shape of a salamander, but the sheet music on the walls was perfectly visible. The song reached its climax, and all the piano strings simultaneously burst with a deafening sound. When I turned on the lights, everything was back to normal, except for an old sheet of music on the piano, with a song titled Requiem of the Salamander, dated 1888. Months later, researching the city's archives, I discovered that my great-grandmother had not been the first owner of the piano. It had belonged to a composer called Elizabeth Vale, who mysteriously disappeared after performing an experimental piece in 1888. Witnesses at the time described her last performance as music which should not have been possible to play by human hands, and mentioned a peculiar salamander brooch. Thor never slept under the piano again, but sometimes I catch him sitting on the bench, staring at the keys as if waiting for something. And on some winter nights, when the snow falls, I can swear I hear distant notes, as if someone is rehearsing a requiem that should never have been written. The most unsettling. The sheet music I found that night has disappeared, but occasionally, in the photos I take of the room, fragments of that same melody appear, floating in the air like musical smoke. Story number 4, The Algorithm of Fear. I've always been fascinated by programming. By the age of 16, I was spending entire nights coding in my room, with only Pixel, my hamster, for company. It was during one of these nights that I found the code. It was an abandoned repository on GitHub, with a name that looked like a random string of numbers, 13x7r4f0b14. The code was written in a language I had never seen before, with symbols that seemed to change every time I blinked. My parents were away that weekend, and I was home alone, except for Pixel, who was spinning his wheel with unusual enthusiasm. The heavy rain falling outside created dancing shadows on my monitor. I decided to try to compile the code. The moment I pressed enter, every light in the house flickered, and my computer made a high-pitched sound, like a digital scream. Pixel stopped running instantly. On the screen, lines of code began to self-generate, forming patterns that resembled faces in agony. A command prompt opened by itself, displaying the message, Mado.exe initializing. Subject number 458 connected. The temperature in the room plummeted, and my monitor started showing security camera footage, but they were of my house, from impossible angles, showing rooms I'd never seen before. In one of the images, I saw something moving in the dark corners, something that seemed to be made of binary code and shadows. Pixel began to fuss in his cage, running in frantic circles. Then my cell phone vibrated. I had received a message from a number that was all zeros. Thanks for letting me in. Your fear has an interesting flavor. The code on the monitor began to form a face, not a human face, but something constructed from ASCII characters, which smiled unnaturally. Their eyes were made of little zeros and ones that moved like insects. I tried turning off the computer, but it continued to work. On the screen, pop-up windows began to appear, each showing a different moment in my life when I felt afraid, memories I had forgotten, transformed into sequences of code. It was then that I realized, the algorithm wasn't just reading my fear, it was feeding on it, growing, learning. Each new terror generated more code, more complexity. Pixel, in a moment of apparent panic, dropped his cage. The noise seemed to break something in the code, and for an instant, I saw a message hidden between the lines, Phobos Project, Phase 1, Emotional Data Collection. Status, 458/1000 subjects processed. I managed to disconnect the computer by ripping out all the cables, but it was too late. Now, every time I turn on any electronic device, I can see that ASCII face for a split second. My browsing history fills up by itself with searches about phobias I've never done, and sometimes, late at night, my computer turns on by itself, running a program called calhitadamado.exe. Pixel was never the same again. He stops moving completely when any screen is on in the room, as if he is paralyzed with terror. And on rainy nights, when lightning illuminates my room, I can swear I see that ASCII face reflected in every shiny surface, smiling, waiting for me to sleep to continue its infinite code of horror. The most disturbing. Last week, I received a recruiting email from a technology company I had never heard of. The name of the project? Phobos, Turning Fear into Data. The company logo? A face in ASCII. Story number 5, or Lost Podcast. I found the podcast by chance, browsing an obscure forum about unexplained phenomena. The title was simple, Episode 0, The Frequency of Silence. The file was just 13 minutes long. Nina, my border collie, was lying at my feet when I put on my headphones. It was a particularly quiet autumn night, with a thick fog that made the street lights fuzzy halos. The podcast began with static, followed by a soft female voice. "Welcome to episode 0. If you're listening to this, you've been chosen." There was something hypnotic about the voice, as if each word was carefully calibrated to resonate with some specific frequency in the brain. My parents were on a spiritual retreat in the country, leaving me alone for the first time in months. The house seemed bigger and emptier as the voice continued. "Every listener is part of an experiment. You are number 247. Nina started acting strangely, her ears moving like radar, focusing on empty spots in the room. The voice on the podcast began describing my room in precise detail, including the exact position where I was sitting. "Look to your right now," said the voice. When I did, I saw a figure quickly walk past my bedroom door. Nina barked once and hid under the bed. The podcast continued. "Are you seeing the shadows move? It's normal. They've always been there, but now your brain frequency is tuned to notice them." The voice began to sing a melody in an unknown language, and I felt my head become heavy. The walls of the room seemed to pulse to the rhythm of the music. Numbers began to appear in the air, floating like luminous dust, endless sequences of 2, 4, 7, Nina whimpered softly. I tried to pause the podcast, but it kept playing. The voice was now speaking directly to me. "Jonathan, do you remember that night 15 years ago? The night of the accident?" It was impossible, I had never told anyone about it. The air became thick, charged with static electricity. My cell phone started ringing, showing calls from a number that was all zeros. In the message box, texts appeared alone. 247 tune, collection in progress, memory accessed. That's when I noticed the headphones. The wires were gone, but I could still hear the voice. She was inside my head now, whispering secrets I'd forgotten, memories I'd buried. Nina started howling at my reflection in the mirror, where I saw something impossible. My reflection was wearing different headphones, and was smiling when I wasn't smiling. The podcast ended abruptly with a repeating Morse code. "All listeners are one. All frequencies are ours." Days later, I tried to find the forum again, but it was gone. I looked for others who had heard episode 0, and found only one disturbing pattern. 247 people reported similar experiences over the past 50 years, all involving the same voice, the same numbers. Nina now barks at my headphones every morning, even when they are turned off. At night, I can hear that unfamiliar melody echoing through the house, as if the walls have memorized the frequency. The scariest? Yesterday I received an email with just an audio file attached. Episode 1, The Frequency of Truth. The sender? Sender 247 at Frequencia d'Oscillance. I still haven't had the courage to listen. But sometimes, in the silence of the early morning, I can swear I hear that voice calling my name, promising to reveal truths that might be better left forgotten. Historia number 6, a playlist du tempo. I found the flash drive attached to the collar of Ziggy, my tabby cat, on a Wednesday morning. It was golden, with a strange symbol engraved on it, a melting analog clock, like in Dali's painting. I was home alone, my parents had gone to a wedding in another state. Curiosity was stronger than prudence, and I connected the device to my notebook. Inside was just a folder called Time Mix, with 24 numbered music files, one for each time of the day. The first song started playing at exactly 1500 hours. It was a strange melody that seemed to change every time I tried to concentrate on it. Ziggy, normally agitated, stood completely still, his eyes fixed on the clock on the wall. It was then that I noticed, the hands of the clock were turning in reverse, each complete revolution faster than the previous one. Through the window, I saw the sun moving backwards in the sky, like a film in rewind. Track 15, Time Reversal Initiated, flashed on the computer screen. I tried to stop the music, but the controls didn't respond. A message appeared, irreversible process until cycle completes. The room began to change subtly. Posters I had taken down years ago reappeared on the walls. My bed returned to its old position. Ziggy watched everything with unearthly calm, his eyes now glowing with a bluish light. On the computer screen, images from my past began to emerge, moments I had forgotten, some I would rather not remember. Each song on the playlist seemed connected to a specific memory, but there was something wrong. In each image, there was a figure watching in the background, wearing a gold jumpsuit with that same melting clock symbol. The temperature in the room fluctuated violently, one moment freezing, the other suffocating. The air felt thick, as if time itself was condensing around me. When the song reached track 24, something impossible happened. I saw myself, 5 years younger, walking into the room. The other me couldn't see me, but Ziggy looked at both of us, his eyes flickering between blue and gold. It was then that I understood, each song on the playlist was rewriting time, not just reversing it. On the computer screen, lines of temporal code appeared, change 247 in progress. Subject responding as expected. Ziggy jumped onto the keyboard, and for a moment his paws left golden trails in the air. A new message appeared, Temporal Guardian number 13, monitoring in progress. Paradox detected. The flash drive began to heat up, emitting an intense golden light. The song started playing all at once, creating a cacophony that seemed to double reality. On the walls, shadows of different versions of me moved as if in a macabre dance. When everything finally stopped, it was night. The flash drive was gone, but the playlist was still on my computer, only now the songs were different, and each one showed a possible future, not the past. Ziggy was never the same again. Sometimes I catch him sitting, staring at the clock on the wall, as if waiting for something. And some nights, I swear I hear those impossible songs playing softly, while I see golden shadows dancing in the corners of my room. The most disturbing? Yesterday I found an old photo from my childhood. In the background, partially visible, is Ziggy, exactly as he is today, without having aged a day. And around your neck, glowing softly, is that same golden flash drive, waiting to be found again. Story number 7, The Whisper of the Dead Trees. I've been a park ranger for 5 years, but I've never seen anything like it. It all started when Rex, my German shepherd, found that strange mark on the tree, a carved symbol that seemed to pulse with a greenish light of its own. It was October, and the forest was different. The leaves, instead of showing the typical autumn colors, were all black, as if they had been burned by an invisible fire. The air smelled metallic, like ozone before a storm. I was doing my evening rounds alone, my partner Mike had called in sick. Rex, normally calm and focused, was restless, growling at the shadows between the trees. That's when I heard the first whisper. It wasn't the wind, it was as if the trees themselves were speaking in an ancient, forgotten language. Rex froze, his ears on high alert. The radio began to pick up strange interference, distorted voices repeating numbers in sequence. 7-3-9-2-1, subject located. Harvest begins. As I walked along the trail, I noticed that every tree had that same glowing symbol, forming a perfect circle. In the center, there was a clearing that I was sure hadn't existed before. The ground in the clearing was covered in black moss that seemed to move as if it were breathing. Rex refused to enter the circle, growling defensively. It was then that I saw the bodies, or what was left of them. Trees with vaguely human shapes, as if people had been turned to wood as they tried to escape. Their faces, frozen in expressions of terror, were still recognizable in the shell. My radio crackled again, "Welcome to the harvest, guard number 739. Your memories will make excellent fertilizer." The voice was like splitting wood, ancient and inhuman. Black moss began to crawl up my boots. Rex barked desperately, trying to pull me out of the clearing. The tree people seemed to move slightly, their finger branches pointing at me. I managed to escape, but not before I saw something that haunts me to this day. Among the tree people, I recognized the face of Mike, my partner, his mouth open in a silent scream, his eyes now just us in the wood. 3 weeks passed. The clearing has disappeared, but the markings are still there, glowing in the night. Rex refuses to go into the forest, and sometimes, late at night, I can hear him howling into the trees, as if responding to calls I can't hear. I found old records of the area. In the last 100 years, 739 people have disappeared in this forest. All in October, all on new moon nights. The most disturbing? Yesterday I received a text message from Mike. The forest is beautiful inside. Come keep us company. The roots are always hungry. The sender number 7-3-9-2-1. And now, every time I pass near that part of the forest, I can swear I hear whispers calling my name, promising that there is a place reserved for me among the trees that were once people. Rex barks at my shadow on the walls, as if it is no longer fully mine. And sometimes when I look in the mirror, I see little twigs starting to grow under my skin. Story number 8, The Numbers Camp. I was always a Boy Scout, but nothing prepared me for that expedition. We were a group of 6, with our search and rescue dog, Shadow, investigating reports of mysterious disappearances in the Pine Ridge National Forest. The first sign that something was wrong was the numbers. We found sequences of them carved into the trees, 1-6-2-4-8-9. Always in the same order, always cut deeply into the shell, as if done with something very hot. Shadow started acting strange on the second day. He sniffed the air constantly and refused to sleep, his eyes fixed on the darkness between the trees. The strangest thing was his behavior when we passed the numbered trees. He would sit and howl at a frequency that made our bones vibrate. By the third night, everyone else was gone. One by one, silently, as if the forest had swallowed them. Only Shadow and I were left at the camp. That's when I noticed the patterns. Each person had disappeared at precise 162-minute intervals. And in each place where someone went missing, we found a new set of carved numbers, still smoldering. The radio only picked up static, except for brief moments when a metallic voice recited that same numerical sequence. Shadow growled into the device every time this happened. At dawn, we found the clearing. It was a perfect circle of dead trees, each marked with numbers in sequence. In the center was an old abandoned weather station, its antennas pointing at impossible angles into the sky. Inside the station, every surface was covered in those numbers, written obsessively, as if by someone, or something, trying to solve an infinite equation. The screens of old computers flickered with the sequence, even when they were turned off. Shadow started barking at a locked door in the basement. When we broke into it, we found walls covered in photographs. They were images of all the people who had disappeared in the forest in the last 50 years. In each photo, the faces were blurred, replaced by numbers. An old diary revealed the truth. In 1962, scientists conducted secret experiments there, trying to use numerical sequences to open dimensional portals. Something went wrong, or terribly right. Shadow started to howl again, but the sound was wrong. When I turned around, I saw that his eyes were now made of moving numbers, like a living digital display. The air became thick, and the numbers on the walls began to move, flowing like mercury. A mechanized voice echoed, "Sequence complete. Last subject located." I managed to escape, but Shadow stayed behind, or whatever Shadow had become. Sometimes, on moonless nights, I can hear it howling in the distance, its bark now a series of binary numbers echoing through the forest. The most disturbing? Every time I look at a digital clock, the numbers seem to shuffle, briefly forming that same sequence, 1-6-2-4-8-9. And in my dreams, I see Shadow running through the trees, his numerical eyes shining, guiding more people to that clearing where mathematics meets the supernatural. Last week, I received a letter with no return address. Inside, just an old photo of the weather station. On the back, written with numbers, the equation is almost complete. Only you are missing. Story number 9, Tales from the Dark Within. Have you ever felt that inexplicable chill, that feeling that something is wrong, even when everything seems normal? Welcome to Tales from the Dark Within, a collection of stories that inhabit that unsettling space between reality and nightmare. Here you will find stories from ordinary people who encountered the inexplicable, a young programmer who discovered a code that feeds on fear, a selfie that captured something that shouldn't exist, a piano that plays music from another world, and a podcast that bends the rules of time. Enter forests where numbers have a life of their own and trees hold dark secrets. Discover houses where mirrors are portals and white vans with sinister smiles lurk around corners. Each story is a dive into a different abyss of everyday horror, where the familiar becomes strange and the impossible comes to life. Our narrators are survivors, each marked by their encounter with the supernatural. Their pets were the first witnesses, dogs, cats and hamsters who noticed the approaching horror before their owners did. They are the silent guardians who watch the shadows move when we think we are alone. These aren't just horror stories, they're warnings. Because somewhere, right now, a mirror is reflecting something that isn't there, a code is rewriting itself, and an old song is playing in a house that should be empty. Prepare to question your own perception of reality. Because when the sun sets and the shadows lengthen, the line between normal and supernatural becomes dangerously blurred. And maybe, just maybe, you'll discover that true horror doesn't come from monsters or ghosts, but from the dark folds of reality we'd rather ignore. Welcome to your new nightmare. The stories are just waiting to be told. But remember, once you know these truths, there is no going back. The darkness within has already noticed your presence. And she is smiling. And so this story ends, but the truth is that not everything has been revealed yet. There are more mysteries, more secrets, that maybe you're not ready to discover. But if you're curious, don't leave yet. The next video that appears on the screen has more chilling stories and revelations that will make you question everything you thought you knew. Don't miss out, click now and get ready for what comes next. See you there.